Shocking, dark, sexual stories no one was supposed to see. Greek mythology is replete with tales of virtue, honesty, and other values. They have been read and shared for years. These tales and characters are intriguing enough to serve as the basis for several works of fiction, movies, and other media. However, there is one aspect of it that is not frequently discussed. Their stories of sexual content may make our generation look foolish. The mythology serves as proof that all sexual content is not a creation of the modern day. Today, we examine a few of those tales. Odysseus and Penelope. Shortly after the birth of their son, Odysseus left Penelope at home while he went off to fight in the Trojan War. But when Odysseus didn't come home after the 10-year war, Penelope soon discovered that her home had been overtaken by 108 suitors. Each man wanted to inherit Odysseus's wealth and tried to convince Penelope that her husband was dead. Penelope, being the cunning woman she was, refused the approaches of her suitors by asking that she make a burial shroud for her father-in-law, Laertes. Every day, she secluded herself in her room with a loom, and each night she unraveled part of her work. She kept up this pretense for 3 years before Odysseus finally returned. Odysseus, who was 20 years older and dressed like a beggar, returned to Penelope and was only recognized by the household dog. He first asked his wife for food and shelter before asking which of the potential husbands she wanted to wed. She told the group of men that she would marry whichever one of them could thread Odysseus's bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads. Odysseus himself can only accomplish this, of course. When he was successful, he made himself known before going on a murderous rampage and killing all 108 of the men who had disrespected his wife and his home during the previous 10 years. Penelope can be recognized in Greek and Roman art from Attic vase paintings. The Penelope painter is identified by his depictions of her, to Roman sculptures that imitate or improvise on classical Greek models, by her seated pose, by her reflective gesture of leaning her cheek on her hand, and by her protectively crossed knees, reflecting her long chastity in Odysseus's absence, an unusual pose in any other figure. Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus was the greatest lyre player in the world. With his music, he could enchant rivers and rocks. As Orpheus fell in love with Eurydice, he wooed her with his song. Their marriage was brief, however, as Eurydice was bitten by a snake and died immediately after saying "I do." Devastated, Orpheus journeyed to the underworld to convince Hades and Persephone to return his bride to him. The king and queen of hell were affected by his music, and on the condition that Orpheus refrain from looking at Eurydice until they were both safely back into the world of the living, they agreed to let Eurydice live again. Orpheus started to suspect that everything might have been a ruse, and that the gods were just making fun of him as they made their way out of the underworld. He fought the impulse to turn around, but his doubts persisted. Orpheus turned as soon as he was back in the world of the living, in time to watch Eurydice slipping back into the shadows and becoming lost forever. Your gain stems from Orpheus's error. Since you can't always keep an eye on your partner, you must have faith in their support. Pygmalion and Galatea. The artist Pygmalion detested women. Every lady he met had serious flaws, so he determined they were not worth his time. He certainly sounds like a winner, don't you think? Pygmalion carved Galatea out of ivory, plunging headfirst into his work. He worked on her for hours because she was more beautiful than any living woman. Pygmalion began to feel intense emotion for his statue, and soon realized he was in love. Galatea was dressed and cared for constantly, but she remained a lifeless, cold piece of ivory. Pygmalion's unrequited love was seen by Aphrodite, and following his subsequent sacrifice to the goddess, she honored his devotion by reviving Galatea. The couple had a child together, Paphos, and lived happily ever after. The tale of Pygmalion and Galatea inspires us to never give up in love, since you can never know where it may show up. Psyche and Eros. Aphrodite was envious of Psyche, since she was the most attractive of her sisters. The goddess sent Eros with a medicine that would prevent all males from marrying the young woman. Eros accidentally poked Psyche with one of his arrows when he enchanted her with an elixir, making her stir. He became agitated before accidentally poking himself, and sprinkled her with a potion that would make her happy for the rest of her life. The strategy devised by Aphrodite was successful. The parents of Psyche were unable to locate a husband for their gorgeous daughter. After consulting the oracle, they discovered that her husband would be a monster that lived atop a mountain. Psyche prepared her belongings and left for what seemed an awful fate. Zephyr lifted Psyche to the top of the mountain. As she got closer to it, the palace of her spouse was a heaven. Psyche's husband was a superb lover, even if they only met at night, but he forbade his wife from ever seeing his face, and made her swear not to snoop around. She concurred. She had no idea that she was to wed Eros. Psyche was initially content, but she quickly became depressed from being alone all day. Eros granted her request for permission to let her sisters come see him. The siblings of Psyche convinced her that her husband was a monster who was simply fattening her up to be his food because they were jealous of their sister's wonderful fortune. She was advised by the sisters to keep a knife and a lantern beside her bed at night. They claimed that if he was evil, she should have a good look at him and then chop off his head. Psyche discovered her husband's true identity by following her sister's recommendations. Eros flew away, hurt that she had broken her word. Psyche went back to live with her parents. She pleaded to Aphrodite in her grief for Eros to come back. You should be swooning over how Eros supported Psyche even after she broke a vow, because you understand the importance of having each other's back, despite trivial arguments with your partner. Pyramus and Thisbe. Born into rival families, Pyramus and Thisbe were star-crossed lovers. They whispered lovely nothings to one another across the cracked wall that separated their homes. The two planned to sneak out at night and meet at a mulberry tree, as they had never met before. Thisbe arrived at the meeting spot first, only to discover a lioness carrying a freshly killed prey. Thisbe fled in fear, leaving her veil behind. The lioness and corpse were gone by the time Pyramus came, but the blood and Thisbe's veil were still there. Pyramus threw himself on his sword, thinking his sweetheart was dead. When Thisbe came back, she discovered his dead body under the mulberry tree. She turned Pyramus's blade on herself, out of despair. Perhaps you'll feel more at ease in new relationships after hearing this blatant prequel to Romeo and Juliet. If these two were willing to sacrifice their lives for one another, despite never having met in person, could you at least relax while messaging a potential partner, Netflix and chill? The Greeks of antiquity were skilled storytellers. Epic battles, dramatic conflict between gods and goddesses, and fantastic creature mashups, as well as some pretty strange sex-related matters. Although we prefer to believe that kink and sexual adventure are a new invention, Greek mythology provides sample evidence to the contrary. Whether or not they contain sexual content The overarching moral of many Greek mythology stories is that the gods are hulking and immature. The lives of the humans in these myths are absolutely horrific, and as a result of this reality, it does make some sense. And this is where our time together ends for today. It's been an exciting peek into the sexual mythological stories. Tell us how thrilling the ride's been for you in the comments section below. For more awesome content, click the like button and subscribe. Till we meet again, stay frosty.